Welcome back to the all too familiar scene. Once again, oven heating up, pizza awaits, and I'm walking around my creaky kitchen talking to you about nothing. Once again, we're back. So, I've just been putting up a bunch of posters, which I used this Poundland 99p store sticky, double-sided sticky pads to do. And, well, whatever is on those 99p store sticky pads, whatever type of glue that is clearly never meant to come into contact with human hands, because I got a bunch on my fingers and they started to burn. My fingers are currently in pain, despite the fact that I washed them off, especially my thumb. It seems to have burned a little bit of my fingerprint off, but very subtly. So that was interesting. You know, putting up a bunch of posters. I say posters. I ripped out pages from the Omnipresence in the Wired art book for Lain, and have been putting them up on my wall. So I guess the chemical burns are worth it, because you know what they say, no pain, no lain. Yeah, that first segment was entirely for that joke. Okay, next segment in this highly organized series. So I got this extra strength CBD oil. Although it says 5% CBD, apparently this is the more strong version of the one that I had before. And I'm going to try it out right now, because I've been feeling a bit anxious and fucked all day. So I'm going to put you down here, and I'm going to put some drops under my tongue. Oh, I just realised that when you do this you have to keep it in your mouth for a minute. So I'm going to not talk for 1 minute, and just see what happens. So I'm going to put this under my tongue. It says 2 to 3 drops, but I just do like one of those. Whatever. Hopefully this isn't crazy strong. Alright, 1 minute. Okay, it's been about a minute. Well, first thing I noticed, it tastes different from the original CBD oil that I was using, because this one, from what they told me at the shop, if it was pure CBD, it would be too thick and pasty to use in this way. So it's actually mixed with some sort of seed oil of some kind, as if it says on the back. I'm sure it will. Hemp seed, oh yeah, it's hemp seed oil mixed with the paste. So it tastes slightly better than the other one, which notoriously everyone knows tastes like shit. Starting to get a little bit of pebbling around me, but it's not very noticeable, which is how it should be. Not very noticeable. So that's a thing. Now for the main heart of this. I'm thinking about music. on Wages in a KG, a lot of people in the comments were saying, like, were asking to elaborate when I said I was doing a music degree, which was barely a degree. So I know some of you probably already know this, but essentially, I'm in university studying music production, despite the fact that I dislike the idea of academizing music, particularly this type of doing it. Like, I can understand studying music theory and or an academic way to learn an instrument, something like that. But I don't think it makes much sense for something that is as creative as production, and also as broad, because, I mean, the concept of music production is an incredibly broad part of music. It can mean anything, you know. You can label as a producer anyone from an audio technician, engineer who works in a studio. That's part of what we learn, or someone who does Foley from TV or movies or animation, or someone who makes their own music, as in produces music electronically. All of these things are under producer. It's all what it was typically known as a producer, the person that an artist hires to mix for them, but also mastering is under production as well, and people mix their own things. It's an incredibly broad genre of job title, I guess. That's not a good way to put it. So I kind of dislike it, and I'm also paying for it. So you would wonder naturally, why are you going to university when you don't want to? Why are you paying someone to teach you things that you already taught yourself on the internet 5 years ago, and paying a lot? Well, mostly my parents are forcing me to do it. Also, due to extenuating circumstances, mental health stuff, and coincidences, I kind of don't have any qualifications. I have some, but it's just under the amount that you technically need to get hired for the most part. Like, the amount, I have the very, very minimum amount that you could of qualification. Like, I didn't quite finish the high school thing. I mean, I did it, I sat all the exams, technically, most of them, and I did the exams, and I don't even remember. It's complicated, but for reasons, mostly I'm blaming my brain and my school. If you've heard me talk about my school before, you know how fucked up it was. The majority of people that were in my year didn't pass most of their tests because the school was so terrible. Like, one of the curriculums we did, everyone got a U, which is like not what's it called? Doesn't apply. It's like worse than an F. It's like what you get if you don't even do the test. Everyone got a U for one thing because they pulled us out of the exam at the last minute because they realized that none of us were going to actually. They hadn't taught us any of the things. Basically, like it was like a supposed to be that particular course was based on coursework. So it's not just a final exam that you sit. You do a bunch of coursework over the whole year, and then that is what they grade you on. But because most of us the teachers hadn't actually given us the coursework correctly. It's the thing I mentioned before about that teacher who turned out to have been teaching the wrong curriculum for a whole year. After they then tried to squeeze that into the next year, towards the end they realized that it was impossible to do all of this stuff, especially like the combination of having to do 2 years work in the space of 1 year, and also the fact that most of the people in that school were kicked out of their previous schools or had other issues or that sort of thing. No one was really there who would be the sort of advanced student that could fit 2 years work into 1 year. Towards the end, they just gave up and didn't end up submitting any of our work, but we were still written down as being signed on to do that course, so everyone got a U for that. Which that's basically the pattern that continued for the rest of everything. That sort of incompetence. So that's why I'm in university. Another big reason, and why my parents kind of are so adamant that I go. Well, also the fact that all my parents went to university, all of them. It's technically. So, my dad has a PhD, and he teaches in a university. My stepmom has a PhD, and my mum is a nurse. So, everyone thinks of also all of them happen to be really good friends with people they met in university. So all of them have this notion that university is the best thing ever, despite the fact that, well, times have changed, and you used to get paid to go to university, and when my dad did it, you got a grant to go to university. It wasn't loans, they just gave you money to go, and it was free. Whereas now it's definitely not at all like that, and also money was worth more back then, and qualifications were worth more back then. It's a lot of shit. It's a lot of reasons, understandable reasons, sure. Everyone wants the best for their child, and in my parents' opinion, from their life experiences, and probably the truth, the best for your child is to get them is to have them do as much education as possible. Sure, it makes sense for them to think like that. I think most parents think like that. And if I wasn't at university, I would have to move out. And to move out, I would have to get a boring full-time job, because, as I said before, I have very few qualifications due to factors mostly outside of my control. Admittedly, some of it is the fact that I was really bad at studying and failed exams that I probably could have passed if I'd studied harder. I'm not trying to shift all of the blame onto my school, but one of the reasons I didn't study is because that was a time when my mental health was at great depths of terribleness. So it's hard to discern which parts of the failure were directly caused by me being an idiot, which I admit to, and which parts were caused by my brain deciding it didn't like me anymore. It's hard to discern between those two things. I obviously take some of the blame for it, but I don't think I can take all of the blame for it. I like to give myself a little bit of leeway here. So, I don't know why I went on that tangent, because that wasn't even what I wanted to talk about. What I wanted to talk about was this idea of you have to know the rules to break them, because this is something that gets brought up in my uni all the time, because I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but a lot of the best music ever is produced in ways that are not traditionally good, and written in ways that are not traditionally good or correct. It varies. An example that gets brought up a lot by the lecturers, because it seems to be the only thing they know, is stuff like early XXXTentacion tracks or low pump tracks, where the bass is so loud that it clips the rest of the track, and that became part of the style. And they say that may be how the music came about, but there's a proper, if you want to do that for someone else, you can create those effects without actually having it clip, and you can create that sort of thing, but do it properly, the proper way, the right way. Well, they're just incorrect. Case in point, look at the new Lil Pump album. They have done that on that album because his label have put a lot of money into him because he's worth a lot of money. So good producers are now trying to emulate the style of people who are purposely breaking the rules that they were never taught in the first place. So now these good producers are trying to break the rules in the correct way, which is obviously stupid because you're breaking there is no correct way. It's music. So they fuck up because they do things like put distortion on the synth and not realize that the fact that it clips and the rest of the drums affect that. Like, if you have a bass that's so loud that it's clipping, when the snare hits, the snare is going to affect the sound of the bass in a way that you can't emulate unless you have it actually clip. Now, even that you could emulate in a way where you have it, you sort of put a limiter on it, right? And you put those two things in a group, so just the bass and the drums are going to this limiter, but then the melody and the vocals are going to separately processed, and then you put them together in the end, something along those lines. You could do that, but once again, it takes away the glue that the clipping, you can't avoid it. If you want to get the style to sound as raw as it does when they do it properly, you have to do it wrong, according to how these people think. But it's very obvious that there is no wrong way to make art. As I was looking into some Throb and Gristle interviews recently, and I was looking specifically at an interview with Genesis P. Orridge where she talks about her history, and she was talking about how she was interested in the way that people play instruments when they don't know how to play the instrument. So she was going on a big thing, very interesting talk about how she considers an instrument to be anything that makes a sound, and therefore anyone that can use anything to make a sound makes them a musician, someone who can play an instrument. So if I agree with her. If I do this, I'm a musician now. Bam. Because I made a sound I don't even know if she cares about intent, because the big thing about early Throb and Gristle records was recording people without their consent and putting that sampled into their music. So who knows? But anyone who can use something, anything can be an instrument. There's no proper way to use it. If you look at videos of Throb and Gristle performing, one of them gets a guitar like this, flat across her lap, and hits the strings with her hands to create drum sounds, and then runs that through a bunch of effects pedals to create these booming industrial drums. That is not the right way to play a guitar. No one is going to teach you that. You could only possibly come up with that if you had no idea how to play guitar. Another thing she brings up is if you know how to tune a guitar properly, you're going to be using the same chords as everyone else, the same notes. Whereas if you don't know how to tune a guitar properly, or if you don't tune it properly, if you tune it to some random thing you think of, you can play chords that no one's ever played before. Now, this is conducive to making a certain type of music, but I think it's actually the opposite way round, that the traditional way of doing things is conducive to making the traditional type of Western music. You only have to look at like gamelan music and other microtonal systems in other cultures to see this example, right? It's completely arbitrary the way that we, particularly in the West, happen to enjoy making music and happen to be used to listening to 4/4 kick drums, that sort of thing. It's all pretty arbitrary, but it feels natural because it's the culture we've been exposed to since birth. So the idea that you have to know the rules to break them, this is kind of gets said in pretty much every art. People used to say it to me back when I did cardistry as well, that you shouldn't invent your own moves straight off the bat. You should start off by learning other people's moves and then go from there to inventing your own moves once you've got technically proficient enough. It's kind of weird because in a sense they're kind of right. Like you can, if you go on YouTube and you watch a cardistry video and you know your shit, you can tell when someone's been inventing their own moves without learning the basics first. Like you can tell that they're sloppy in a sense. But you also, because of that, get really interesting moves that no one would do because they don't have the traditional flow and rhythm that most other moves do. And there's quite a lot of people that make moves like that and then went on to become really popular. Not that anyone here knows about cardistry people, but there was this guy called James Chesmore back in the day who used to make a lot of his own moves, and they were very innovative. In fact, he made one of my favourite moves. I don't even know what it's called, and he doesn't do it anymore because it was like 4 years ago, but it's really cool, and no one, I do it all the fucking time. It's sick, and it's something that no one would ever think about, but he clearly started from a young age, at early time, making his own moves and developed his own style. In fact, in some of his early videos, he's doing these moves where he uses he just isn't using a full deck. Like he uses part of the deck, which is against the rules of cardistry you're supposed to use the full deck to do the thing. It's like an unspoken rule, but there's no reason, and you're actually limiting yourself by doing that. So that's my basically final point. You can learn the rules and then break them, but you can do even more interesting things if you were never influenced by the rules in the first place. Does this mean you should never learn the rules? No. At a certain point, if you want to make the sort of music that has rules, like Western music, for example, then you're going to need to learn them. You can't get away with not. For example, no way I could ever make a convincing jazz song because I don't know anything about jazz harmony. If you want to make that sort of music that has those rules, then you have to abide by them and learn them first. But if you're more interested in experimentation than doing things that pre-existing genres, then there's not really anything you need there's no reason to force yourself to learn these things that are for a system that doesn't interest you. The excuse they often give at university for why they teach us these things is it's fine to not do things the proper way, but if you get hired to do something by someone and they want you to do it this way and you don't know what you're doing, then you're not going to get paid. Which is fair enough, but also, I'm not very interested in getting hired. It doesn't really matter to me. That's not why I make music. I think anyone who makes music thinking, yeah, this is good, but will it get me hired? I just can't relate to that attitude very much. So I guess the conclusion is I shouldn't be in university learning music because I'm too much of an edgelord idiot who is just ridiculously has problems with authority for absolutely no reason to even properly take advantage of the amazing opportunity that I've been given living in a country with an education system that is supposedly one of the best in the world, and having all this opportunity to learn with teachers who have been in the industry for ages and have made amazing stuff, and I'm here wasting it by not going in and fucking eating pizza instead. I guess that is the conclusion to this video. Goodbye.